The neighborhoods of Kirtland Hills and Kirtland Village are some of the most distinctive in Northeast Ohio. Its fascinating history is unique to the region, and includes being a playground for the very wealthy, and a place dedicated to the very devoted. Some were so devoted, that they made the ultimate sacrifice, losing their life. It is part of what makes these neighborhoods, like no other, in the Northeast Ohio area. And we will examine these very interesting towns, in today's episode of the history and stories of our neighborhoods. Before we begin, if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe, and please click on the notification button, so you can be notified when we drop more videos, like this one. A long time ago, Kirtland was a place of lush forests, rivers and streams. It was a prime location for the indigenous tribes to settle at. The Adinas and Hopewell tribes made their homes here. They were mound builders. The Whittlesey tribe built their villages on the bluffs, above the river banks. Many of these tribes left a variety of artifacts, all marking their time here. The area was also where several French and British traders came to trade goods with the natives. These were the first white settlers to inhabit the area. One of the earliest white pioneers to come to the area of Kirtland Hills was Levi Smith, who arrived in 1774. He came from Connecticut. He married Ruth Holbrook in 1800, and built his farm, where he and Ruth raised 4 children. When Ruth died in 1818, Levi went back to Connecticut, where he remarried. He returned to the farm in 1819 with his second wife, and they both began the first Congregational Church. The land where Kirtland sits became part of the Connecticut Western Reserve Land Grant. Turhan Kirtland, who was a principal of the Connecticut Land Company, and was also a Revolutionary War veteran, purchased the land that would eventually be named after him. In 1803, when Ohio became a state, Kirtland was first part of Trumbull County, and then became part of Geauga County. Some of the town would later become part of Lake County. As the city of Kirtland Hills grew, the beauty of the area became the perfect spot for various summer resorts. These resorts were built on Little Mountain. Little Mountain has an elevation of 1,266 feet, and is the highest point above sea level in Ohio. It has rich forest, deep caverns and very interesting rock formations. In fact, these rock formations have been given various nicknames, such as Devil's Kitchen, Devil's Bedroom and Table Rock. The area also has many springs of cold, clear water. These springs were touted with healing powers. Some of the resorts that made their home here exploited the springs for their own and their guest benefits. One of the first resorts to be built in Little Mountain was the Little Mountain Resort. It was built in 1831 by Simeon Reynolds. It was sold in 1868. The new owners then expanded the resort, and renamed it the Lakeview House. The Lakeview House became one of the most popular resorts for the upper class. It included such amenities as an indoor bowling alley, and an observation platform where guests could watch boats on Lake Erie. This was the place that the very well-to-do Clevelanders came to spend their warm summers. They would leave the hot industrial city, retreating to the cool winds and pleasant atmosphere that Little Mountain and the Lakeview House provided. The Lakeview House closed in 1891, and was replaced by the Pinecrest Hotel. The Pinecrest Hotel included some of the best, and most state-of-the-art technology of the time, including telegraph machines, electricity, hot and cold water in every room, and a baggage elevator. It also included a variety of fun activities both indoor and outdoor, along with a casino for the adults, and a special play area for the children. The Little Mountain Eagle Resort was another resort in the area. Their specialty was touting the cold water springs as a water cure for their guests. They advertised a very luxurious stay for their guests, but among the many resorts, hotel and cabins of the Little Mountain area, it was the least successful. At its peak, Little Mountain of Kirtland Hills boasted several hotels, cottages, a bowling alley, a Western Union telegraph station, a post office and much more. The resorts were a boon to the farms that dotted the area of Kirtland. Farm produce and services were in demand by the summer people, and this helped develop the area, and it grew bigger year after year. The resorts of Little Mountain and Kirtland Hills were meant mainly for the upper class, as the price to stay at the resorts was usually not in the budget of most of the working class of the era. The area became so popular in its 94 years, that many of the wealthy industrialists of the Northeast Ohio area built their own cottages, to take advantage of the beauty of the location. Among the elites that came to this summer resort was Jephthah Wade, who was the owner of the Western Union Telegraph Company, and who created Wade Park, for the city of Cleveland. Famous industrialist and philanthropist, John D. Rockefeller. Amasa Stone, who was a railroad baron and industrialist. State Senator, Henry Payne. President, James A. Garfield. And Leonard Hanna, whose family was among the wealthiest families in the city of Cleveland. Hanna actually purchased his home from John Wanamaker's England estate. John Wanamaker owned the Wanamaker department store in Philadelphia. The home that Hanna purchased was one of 3 homes on Wanamaker's property in England, and it was originally built in 1472. Hanna had a 300-acre farm in Kirtland Hills, which he styled after an English feudal village. On the grounds of the farm was a huge pool and pool house, a covered bridge, guest houses, kennels, a caretaker's house, sheep barns, and a gatehouse. Hanna also had a home in New York City. And he made many famous friends, several who lived near him in New York. He would often invite these famous friends to his country estate in Kirtland Hills. His group of friends included Cole Porter, Gene Tunney, Gloria Swanson, and Joan Crawford. In 1831, around the time that the first Little Mountain Resort opened its doors to its first guests, a man by the name of Joseph Smith came from Fayette, New York to Kirtland. He had just started a new religious movement he called the Latter-day Saints movement. He left his first church in Fayette and came seeking a new home for his new religion. He decided Kirtland, Ohio would be the place, and he gathered his followers here to join him. Shortly after he arrived, in 1832, Smith stated that he had a revelation. The revelation was that he needed to construct a house that would be a place of worship, education and order. He and his followers began construction on their new temple, in 1833. They used Berea sandstone, from the base of the nearby Gildersleeve Mountain. The church cost around $40,000 to build, and was quite opulent for its time. While the church was being built, Smith claimed to have had several visions, all while at the site of the new temple. He claimed that he saw Jesus, Moses, Elias and Elijah. He wrote his visions down in his journals. The Kirtland Temple was opened, in March 1836. In 1837, Smith started a bank, called the Kirtland Safety Society. The bank ultimately failed. The failure of the bank created a schism among the Latter-day Saints, in Kirtland. The dissenters included Warren Parrish, one of Smith's former secretaries, and Martin Harris, who was one of the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon. They took hold of the temple, and other church properties. In 1838, Smith was forced to flee Ohio, and he relocated west to Missouri, with hundreds of his loyalists. They eventually built a similar church in Nauvoo, Illinois, where a mob in the town then rose up against them, and killed Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram. The Kirtland Latter-day Saints group dissolved in 1841. The Kirtland Temple was used as the Western Reserve Teachers Seminary, for a time. There were several members that sought to get control again of the Kirtland Temple. In 1860, the state of Ohio sold the Kirtland Temple to pay off some of Joseph Smith's debts. Joseph Smith's son purchased a quit-claim deed on the temple, in 1874. In 1880, the RLDS Church began the Kirtland Temple suit, to get a clear title to the church. The court stated that the RLDS Church was the lawful successor of the church, but then dismissed the case. The Latter-day Saints finally secured ownership of the Kirtland Temple in 1901, by adverse possession. The RLDS met on a regular basis at the temple, through 1950. The Kirtland Temple is currently only used around 50 times per year for worship services, as the RLDS Church uses another temple nearby. It is now a place for Latter-day Saint members to come and visit, and is used more as a historic and classroom site, than a place of worship. Back again in 1925, Leonard Hanna held a meeting at the Union Club, and asked that the Little Mountain area be renamed the village of Kirtland Hills. He wanted to honor Dr. Jared P. Kirtland, who discovered the Kirtland warbler. Kirtland was also a friend of John J. Audubon, the first president of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. The decision was made to change the name, and the village of Kirtland Hills was incorporated on October 8, 1926. The last of the Little Mountain resorts closed in 1925. Today very little remains of that period of time, except for a few relics, here and there. In 1913, Albert Fairchild Holden, who was one of the great industrialists of Cleveland, and who made his wealth in mining and refining, passed away. He owned a large estate of several hundred acres, in Kirtland Hills. He had quite a collection of minerals, which he left to the Mineralogical and Geological Museums, at Harvard. He also planned to leave his estate to the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard. But his sister Roberta Holden Bowl convinced Albert that Cleveland also needed an arboretum. Holden then established an arboretum in memory of his deceased daughter, Elizabeth Davis Holden. So, after Holden's passing, they looked at sites at Lakeview Cemetery, and in the village of Bratt en Orr, but neither of those sites quite worked out for the arboretum. Then in 1931, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Bowl contributed 100 acres of land from his estate, to Kirtland Township. This land became the nucleus of the Holden Arboretum, which at first was run by the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, until 1952. In 2014, the Holden Arboretum joined forces with the Cleveland Botanical Gardens. It now spans around 2,900 acres, and is the 12th largest public garden in the country. For a time, Kirtland Hills and Kirtland Village remained somewhat stagnant. Not much happened in these neighborhoods, until after World War II, when subdivisions were built. And by 1960, an influx of new businesses began to open up in the area. When Interstate 90 was completed, it made it much easier to commute to the city of Cleveland, and thus the population of Kirtland Village grew. But that also brought some not-so-great moments in the town's history. In the late 1980s, a man by the name of Jeffrey Lundgren came to Kirtland. He was part of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, of Latter-day Saints. He started in the church as a boy in Independence, Missouri. Lundgren had a very difficult childhood. To counter this, he retreated into the church. It was there that he met his first wife, Alice Keeler. He married Alice in 1970, and shortly after they married, he enlisted in the Navy. He served one term, and was honorably discharged. But after Alice was pregnant for the fourth time, he found himself in serious financial difficulties. He grew sick of his wife, becoming very abusive, one day rupturing her spleen, sending her to the hospital. When his behavior was discovered by the church, he was immediately dismissed as a lay minister. Then he came to Kirtland in 1987, and lived in church housing, while working as a volunteer tour guide at the Kirtland Temple. In this capacity, Lundgren began teaching the concept of dividing the word. This is known as a chiasmus, to interpreting scriptures. He began to falsely claim that he created a new chiastic interpretation. This interpretation of his attracted many followers. This made the church quite unhappy, and he was asked to leave his church home. He was also terminated from his job at the temple. Lundgren then moved his family to a rented farmhouse on Chardon Road, in Kirtland Village. Several of his followers moved into the same home. Some of his followers already knew Lundgren from his time in Missouri, while others knew him from the Kirtland temple. While they remained in his clutches at the farmhouse, he began using methods of mind control with his followers, thus, in turn, creating his own cult. One example of this is that he forbade any of his followers to talk amongst themselves. Doing so was a sin he called murmuring. He would also eavesdrop on his followers, and managed to have them believe that he could read their minds. In 1988, a neighbor called the police to say that she believed that a cult was living inside the farmhouse. Lundgren's son then scared the neighbor's children, and threatened them. A few days later, a former member of the cult also went to the police, and told them that Lundgren planned a takeover of the Kirtland temple. Kirtland's police chief, Dennis Yarbrough, did not initially believe the former cult member. But Yarbrough did confront Lundgren at the Kirtland police station. He warned Lundgren that there were complaints about gunfire at this property. Lundgren went back to his followers, and called off the takeover of the Kirtland temple, which definitely had been in the works. He knew the heat was on him, but claimed the reason they were not going to take over the church was purely because of divine intervention. Later that year, in September, another informant went to the police about Lundgren. This time the police took the information to the FBI and the ATF. The FBI initiated a domestic terrorism investigation. In October 1988, Lundgren was excommunicated from the RLDS Church. He decided that he and his family would leave the larger group, and form a splinter group of not more than 20 people. Lundgren then offered Bible study sessions in his home. He would intimidate anyone who disagreed with his interpretation of Scripture, as he saw it. He then encouraged anyone else to intimidate those who disagreed, as well. He wanted everyone in his group to see that he was God's last prophet. He persuaded his followers to give him their life savings. He then told his followers that they would soon witness the second coming of Christ at the Kirtland temple on May 3rd. May 3rd was Lundgren's birthday. He stated that they must take the temple over by force, and this included both burglary and murder. At that time, 12 members of his cult lived in his home. Only 5 cult members did not. They were the Avery family. A couple years earlier, Dennis Avery had sold his Missouri home, and moved to Ohio, to be closer to Lundgren. He believed in Lundgren completely, and trusted him without fail. But Lundgren considered it a sin that Dennis Avery and his family did not live in the same house with him and the other followers. Lundgren considered Avery to be weak, and was no longer useful to him. He would talk behind Avery's back, and made him a scapegoat for any and all of their troubles. When Avery decided to set aside some of his money for his own family's use, Lundgren thought this was a huge sin, as all of Avery's money was supposed to go to him and only him. When Lundgren decided to seize the Kirtland temple, he also decided to kill anyone who got in their way. He convinced his followers that this was the right thing to do. But then, Lundgren changed his mind about seizing the temple. He instead decided that they should kill a family of 5, as a way they would then be able to see God. As a punishment for their disloyalty, Lundgren chose Dennis Avery and his family. On April 10, 1989, Lundgren ordered 2 of his followers to dig a pit in the barn. The pit was to be the spot where the bodies of the Avery family would be placed after their deaths. He then told his followers, including the Averys, that they would all be going on a wilderness trip. On April 17, he rented a motel room, and had dinner with his followers. He then called most of the men into his room, and made them agree to help him with the sacrifice of the Avery family. The men agreed to help in the sacrifice. Of course, the only man not invited to the room was Dennis Avery. A short while later, they brought Dennis Avery to the barn, where the pit had been dug. They tried to stun him unconscious with a stun gun, but failed. They physically overcame him, gagged him, and then shot him in the head, killing him. They masked the sound of the gun with the loud sound of a chainsaw, so as not to cause panic. They then asked Avery's wife Cheryl to come into the barn, telling her that her husband needed help. She was also gagged, and shot 3 times. After that, the 3 Avery children were all brutally killed in the barn. Their bodies were buried in the pit. The police came to the farm the day after the murders, to talk to Lundgren. Though nothing happened. But that visit from the police made Lundgren very paranoid. He immediately left Ohio, moving with his followers to West Virginia. 9 months after the killings, a tip led the police to the long-abandoned barn, where the 5 bodies of the Avery family were discovered. The Lundgrens became fugitives, and with it the media attention increased. The police and the FBI began tracking the cult members. Lundgren's abandoned cult followers helped to catch him and his family. Altogether, 13 members of his sect were caught. Most were given long prison sentences, except for a few, who pled out, and received reduced sentences. Lundgren was found guilty, and received the death penalty. He was executed, on October 24, 2006. Lundgren's cult, and the murders of the Avery family, put Kirtland in a spotlight they had not wanted or expected. It did take Kirtland Village a few years to bounce back. But in the late 1990s Kirtland became, once again, an increasingly popular destination for tourists. Historic Kirtland Village was created, with buildings that preserved the area from the 1830s, and from the time that Joseph Smith came with his Latter-day Saints followers. Though most of the farms from the grand era of the great estates of Kirtland Hills are no longer around, the Holden Arboretum still stands as a small reminder of those times, and is a wonderful place to visit year-round. These 2 locations bring a whole host of people to the area every year. Kirtland has been a haven of both darkness and light, and was, and still remains, one of the most interesting neighborhoods in the Northeast Ohio area with a fascinating history. Visiting here, you will see how things once were. And you will also glimpse into what the future might bring to Kirtland Hills and Kirtland Village. Thank you again, for watching the history and stories of our neighborhoods. We want to thank each of our subscribers, and ask that if you have not subscribed to our channel, to please do so. Please also look out for our other videos, including the Icons of Northeast Ohio, and for our upcoming videos of our walking tours of neighborhoods of Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. Also, please become one of our patrons on our Patreon page. We have included a link below. By becoming one of our patrons you can help us to create more videos like this one. Plus, we may even give you a shout out in one of our future videos. Also, if you have any ideas or suggestions of neighborhoods you would like to see highlighted in an upcoming video, please leave a comment about that, in our comment section. Thanks again for watching the history and stories of our neighborhoods. We look forward to seeing you again real soon.